Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Insurgent Mexico. Today we'll be completing the chapter we was reading and maybe get into the final chapter. Maybe finish the book, depending on how things go, how I'm feeling. But yeah, let's go ahead and just hop into this. Outside, strong moonlight flooded all the village. The jumbled roofs were so many tipped up silvery plains, and the treetops glistened. Like a frozen cataract, the arroyo fell away, and the great valley beyond lay drowned in rich, soft mist. The life sounds quickened in the dark, excited laughter of young girls, a woman catching her breath at a window to the swift hot torrent of a man's speech. As he leaned against the bars, a dozen guitars syncopating each other, a young buck hurrying to meet his novia, spurs ringing clear. It was cold as we passed Cabrera's door. A hot, smoky, alcoholic breath smote us. Beyond that, you crossed on stepping stones the stream where the women washed their clothes. Climbing the other bank, we saw the brilliant windows of Don Priquiliano's house and heard the far strains of Valle Yegre's orchestra. Open doors and windows were choked with men, tall, dark, silent peons, wrapped to the eyes in their blankets, staring at the dance with eager and solemn eyes. A forest of sombreros. Now Fidencio had just returned to Valle Allegres after a long absence, and as we stood on the outside of the group of a tall young fellow caught sight of him, and whirling his serape like a wing, he embraced my friend, crying, "Happy return, Fidencio! We looked for you many months." The crowd swayed and rocked like a windy wheat field. Blankets flapped dark against the night. They took up the cry, "Fidencio, Fidencio is here. Your Carmencita is inside, Fidencio. You had better look out for your sweetheart. You can't stay away as long as that and expect her to remain faithful to you." Those inside caught the cry and echoed it, and the dance, which had just begun, stopped suddenly. The peons formed a lane through which we passed, patting us on the back with little words of welcome and affection, and at the door a dozen friends crowded forward to hug us, faces alight with pleasure. Carmencita, a dumpy small Indian girl dressed in a screaming blue ready-made dress that didn't fit, stood over near the corner by the side of a certain Pablito, her partner, a half-breed youth about 16 years old with a bad complexion. She affected to pay no attention to Fidencio's arrival, but stood dumbly with her eyes on the ground, as is proper for unmarried Mexican women. Fidencio swaggered among his compadres in true manly fashion for a few minutes, interspersing his conversation with loud virile oaths. Then, in a lordly manner, he went straight across the room to Carmencita, placed her left hand within the hollow of his right arm, and cried, "Well now, let's dance." And the grinning, perspiring musicians nodded and fell to. There were 5 of them, 2 violins, a cornet, a flute, and a harp. They swung into Tres Piedras, and the couples fell in line, marching solemnly round the room. After parading round twice, they fell to dancing, hopping awkwardly over the rough, hard, packed dirt floor with jingling spurs. When they had danced around the room 2 or 3 times, they walked again, then danced, then walked, then danced, so that each number took about an hour. It was a long, low room with whitewashed walls and a beamed ceiling wattled with mud above, and at one end was the inevitable sewing machine, closed now, and converted into a sort of an altar by tiny embroidered cloth, upon which burned a perpetual rush flame before a tawdry color print of the Virgin which hung on the wall. Don Prequiliano and his wife, who were nursing a baby at her breast, beamed from chairs at the other end. Innumerable candles had been heated on one side and stuck against the wall all around, whence they trailed sooty snakes above them on the white. The men made a prodigious stamping and clinking as they danced, shouting boisterously to one another. The women kept their eyes on the floor and did not speak. I caught sight of the pimply youth glowering with folded arms upon Fidencio from his corner, and I stood by the door. Fragments of the peon's conversation floated into me. Fidencio should not have stayed away so long. Caramba! See the way Pablito scowls there? He thought surely Fidencio was dead, and that Carmencita was his own. And then a hopeful voice. Perhaps there will be trouble. The dance finally ended, and Fidencio led his betrothed correctly back to her seat against the wall. The music stopped. The men poured out into the night, where in the flare of a torch, the owner of the losing rooster sewed bottles of strong drink. We toasted each other boisterously in the sharp dark. The mountains around stood dazzling in the moon, and then, for the intervals between dances that were very short, we heard the music erupt again volcanically and exuberantly into a waltz, the center of 20 curious and enthusiastic youths, for he had traveled. Fidencio strutted back into the room. He went straight to Carmencita, but as he led her out upon the floor, Pablito glided up behind him, pulling out a large, obsolete revolver. A dozen shots rang. Ciudadano! Fidencio, look out! He whirled to see the revolver pointed at his stomach. For a moment, no one moved. Fidencio and his rival looked at each other with wrathful eyes. There was a subdued clicking of automatics everywhere as the gentlemen drew and cocked their weapons, for some of them were friends of Pablito's. I heard low voices muttering, Porfirio, go home and get my shotgun. Victoriano, my new rifle. It lies on the bureau in Mother's room. A shoal of small boys, like flying fish, scattered through the moonlight to get firearms. Meanwhile, the status quo was preserved. The peons had squatted out of the range of fire so that just their eyes showed above the window sills, where they watched proceedings with joyous interest. Most of the musicians were edging toward the nearest window. The harpist, however, had dropped down behind his instrument. Don Prequiliano and his wife, still nursing the infant, rose and majestically made their way to some interior part of the house. It was none of their business. Besides, they did not wish to interfere with the young folks' pleasure. With one arm, Fidencio carefully pushed Carmencita away, holding his other hand poised like a claw. In the dead silence, he said, "You little goat, you stand there pointing that thing at me if you're afraid to shoot it. Pull the trigger while I am unarmed. I am not afraid to die, even at the hand of a weak little fool who doesn't know when to use a gun." The boy's face twisted hatefully, and I thought he was going to shoot. "Ah!" murmured the peons. Now's the time." But he didn't. After a few minutes, his hand wavered, and with a curse, he jammed the pistol back into his pocket. The peons straightened up and crowded disappointingly around the doors and windows. The harpist got up and began to tune his harp. There was much thrusting back of revolvers into holsters, and the sprightly social conversation grew up again. By the time the small boys arrived with a perfect arsenal of rifles and shotguns, the dance had been resumed, so the guns were stacked in a corner. As long as Carmencita claimed his amorous attention and there was a prospect of friction, Fidencio stayed. He swaggered among the men and basked in the admiration of the ladies, outdancing them all in speed and abandon and noise. But he soon tired of that, and the excitement of meeting Carmencita palled upon him. So he went out into the moonlight again and up the arroyo to take part in Charlie Chee's celebration. As we approached the hotel, we were conscious of a curious low moaning sound which seemed akin to music. The dinner table had been removed from the dining room into the street, and around the room Turkey trotted Foo and another Celestial. A barrel of aguardiente had been set up on the trestle in one corner, and beneath it sprawled Charlie himself. In his mouth a glass tube which siphoned up into the barrel. A tremendous wooden box of Mexican cigarettes had been smashed open on one side, and the packages tumbling out upon the floor. In other parts of the room, two more Chinamen slept in the profound sleep of the very drunk, wrapped in blankets. The two who danced sang meanwhile their own version of a once popular ragtime song called Dreamy Eyes. Against this marched magnificently the Pilgrim's Chorus from Tannhauser, rendered by a phonograph set up in the kitchen. Charlie removed the glass tube from his mouth, put a thumb over it, and welcomed us with a hymn which he sang as follows: "Pull for the shore, sailor, pull for the shore. Heed not the lowling slave, but pull for the shore." He surveyed us with a bleary eye and remarked, "Bledlau le Caliste is with us here, Tony." After which he returned the siphon to his mouth. He blended into these festivities. Fidencio offered to exhibit the steps of a new Spanish fandango, the way it was danced by the damned grasshoppers, as Mexicans call the Spaniards. He stamped, bellowing around the room, colliding with the Chinamen and roaring, "La Paloma!" Finally, out of his breath, he collapsed upon the nearby chair and began to descant upon the many charms of Adolfo's bride, whom he had seen for the first time that day. He declared that it was a shame for so young and blithe a spirit to be tied to a middle-aged man. He said that he himself represented youth, strength, and gallantry, and was a much more fitting mate for her. He added that as the evening advanced, he found that he desired her more and more. Charlie Chee, with the glass tube in his mouth, nodded intelligently at each of these statements. I had a happy thought. Why not send both of these why not send for Adolfo and his wife and invite them to join our festivities? The Chinamen asleep on the floor were kicked awake and their opinion asked. Since they could understand neither Spanish nor English, they answered fluently in Chinese. Fidencio translated. They say, he said, that Charlie ought to be sent with the invitation. We agreed to that. Charlie rose while Fu took his place at the glass tube. He declared that he would invite them in the most irresistible terms, and strapping on his revolver, disappeared. 10 minutes later, we heard 5 shots. We discussed the matter at length, not understanding why there should be any artillery at this time of night, except that probably 2 guests returning from the ballet were murdering each other before going to bed. Charlie took a long time. In the meanwhile, and we were just considering the advisability of sending out an expedition to find him when he returned. Well, how about it, Charlie? I asked. Will they come? I don't think so, he replied doubtfully, swaying in the doorway. Did you hear the shooting? Asked Fidencio. Yes, very close, said Charlie. Fu, if you will kindly get out from under that tube. What was it? We asked. Well, said Charlie, I knocked at Adolfo's door and said we were having a party down here and wanted him to come. He shot at me 3 times and I shot at him twice. So saying, Charlie seized Fu by the leg and composedly lay down under the glass tube again. We must have stayed there some hours after that. I remember that toward morning Ignacio came in and played us Trosti's Goodbye, to which all the Chinamen danced solemnly around. At about 4 o'clock, Ignacio appeared. He burst open the door and stood there very white, with a gun in one hand. Friends, he said, a most disagreeable thing has happened. My wife, Juanita, returned from her mother's about midnight on an ass. She was stopped on the road by a man muffled up in a poncho who gave her an anonymous letter in which were detailed all my little amusements when I last went for recreation to Juarez. I have seen the letter. It is astonishingly accurate. It tells how I went to supper with Maria and then home with her. It tells how I took Anna to the bullfight. It describes the hair, complexion, and disposition of all those other ladies and how much money I spent upon them. Caramba! It is exact to a cent. Then she got home. I happened to be down at Caterino's taking a cup with an old friend. This mysterious stranger appeared at the kitchen door with another letter in which he said I had 3 more wives in Chihuahua, which God knows is not true, since I have only 1. It is not that I care, amigos, but these things have upset Juanita horribly. Of course, I denied these charges, but valgame Dios, women are so unreasonable. I hired Dionisio to watch my house, but he is gone to the ballet, and so arousing and dressing my small son, that he may carry me word of any further outrages, I have come down to seek your help in preserving my home from this disgrace. We declared ourselves willing to do anything for Atanasio, anything, that is, that promised excitement. We said that it was horrible, that the evil stranger ought to be exterminated. Who could it be? Atanasio replied that it was probably Flores, who had had a baby by his wife before he married her, but who had never succeeded in quite capturing her affections. We forced aguardiente upon him, and he drank moodily. Charlie Chi was pried loose from the glass tube where food took his place, and sent for weapons. And in 10 minutes he returned with several loaded revolvers of different makes. Almost immediately came a furious pounding on the door, and Atanasio's young son flung himself in. "Papa!" he cried, holding out a paper. "There is another one!" The man knocked at the back door, and when Mama went to find out who it was, she could only see a big red blanket covering him entirely up to the hair. He gave her a note and ran away, taking a loaf of bread off the window. With trembling hands, Atanasio unfolded the paper and read aloud, "Your husband is the father of 45 small children in the state of Coahuila. Signed, someone who knows him." "Mother of God!" cried Atanasio, springing to his feet in a transport of grief and rage. "It is a lie! I have always discriminated. Forward, my friends! Let us protect our homes!" Seizing our revolvers, we rushed out into the night. We staggered panningly up the steep hill to Atanasio's house, sticking close together so no one would be mistaken by the others for the mysterious stranger. Atanasio's wife was lying on the bed, weeping hysterically. We scattered into the brush and poked into the alleys around the house, but nothing stirred. In a corner of the corral lay Dionisio, the watchman, fast asleep, his rifle by his side. We passed on up the hill until we came to the edge of the town. Already dawn was coming. A never-ending chorus of roosters made the only sound, except the incredibly soft music from the baile at Don Priquiliano's, which would probably last all that day and the next night. Afar, the big valley was like a great map, quiet, distinct, immense. Every wall, corner, tree branch, and grass blade on the roofs of the houses were picked out in the wonderful clear light of before dawn. In the distance, over the shoulder of the red mountains, went a man covered in a red serape. "Aha!" cried Atanasio. "There he goes!" And with one accord, we opened up on the red blanket. There were 5 of us, and we had 6 shots apiece. They echoed fearfully among the houses and clapped from mountain to mountain, reproduced each one 100 times. Of a sudden, the village belched half-dressed men and women and children. They evidently thought that a new revolution was beginning. A very ancient crone came out of a brown house on the edge of the village, rubbing her eyes. "Oiga!" she shouted. "What are you shooting at?" We are trying to kill that accursed man in the red blanket who is poisoning our homes and making Valle Alegre place unfit for a decent woman to live in, shouted Atanasio, taking another shot. The old woman bent her bleary eyes upon our target. But, she said gently, that is not a bad man. That's my own son going after the goats. Meanwhile, the red-blanketed figure, never even looking back, continued his placid way over the top of the mountain and disappeared. We'll go ahead and end here since that ends that chapter. And we'll leave us one chapter left. Yeah. So they thought they had caught up with this guy spreading rumors about Anastasio. Or Atanasio, that's his name. And, putting his marriage in serious peril. But yeah, it's ridiculous. So yeah, they had no problems firing the guns. As you can see, this whole chapter has been nothing but a celebration, a party. But how many gunshots have been fired already? Oh, goodness. Yeah, hopefully next episode we'll finish up the series and we'll be on to something else. And I've had another book in mind, so already. But, at that, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.